Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, it's about recovery. And right now, it's not brought to you by anybody.
Just me and you and Josh.
Yep. Or maybe Recovery Strong. We're going to hear Jared Shaw's story in just a second.
Yep.
But I want to talk to you about something that, as of now, I've been on TV again for a month.
Right. Oh, the month is up. Yeah, that's
The month
right.
is
Yeah,
up,
yeah.
and there's going to be a decision that's going to have to be made, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do on that yet, so we're not going to dive into that right now.
Okay.
But one thing I want to talk about is I love meeting people who are rocking their recovery. And by I mean rocking it, like just proud of it, and their ownership. And I did this job for 20 years before I had to take the 3-year hiatus.
Right.
And I'd have conversations with people at live shots and out in the public, and I never really got to know them. You know what I mean? It was all somewhat superficial. I had some good interactions with people, but now the conversations I'm having with people are so authentic and so not superficial.
Well, they're about real things that mean a lot to them, like their recovery, right?
And so, like, I bet you 70% of the time I'm doing a live shot. When the cameras are off and we're talking and figuring out what we're going to shoot next and what we're going to talk about, inevitably it goes to recovery. And it's either them who are rocking their sobriety or someone they know who's rocking their sobriety or somebody who they know is battling with addiction. But it becomes just this freeing, weightless conversation where we're just going, man, how are you? And then helping each other out. It's wonderful.
What's really cool about that is that it illustrates a theory that I think most of us in mental health have had for a long time, is that people are carrying around stuff inside and they're waiting for permission to talk about it. And one of the reasons that people don't talk too much about substance abuse, addiction, and recovery is because of the stigma that's been always associated with it. So now that you've, along with a lot of other people, kind of pioneered this movement over the last 5 to 10 years of bursting that bubble, I'm not surprised that people come up and talk to you about it, because guess what? It's in everybody's family. It's in everybody's friend circle. People carry that around. They want to talk about it.
But for the longest time, families were suffering in silence because they didn't know who they could talk to. They didn't know if they should talk to, and they didn't want the stigma of knowing that they have somebody or themselves in their family battling with addiction.
Right.
And it was just this, like I said it all the time, is like after I got out of rehab, I had so many people come up to me and go, we saw it coming, but we just didn't know what to say. And I was like, well, you could have said anything. Right. And to be honest with you, I don't know if I would have responded how you wanted me to.
Probably not.
But, all of a sudden I was in this fraternity that I didn't want to be a part of. Yeah. And I found all these brothers that I knew in my real life that I now find out I really didn't know, because I didn't know that they were battling with the same things I was battling.
Right. Everybody keeps it to themselves.
And now we're having this open conversation, and that's what this podcast was designed to do, is to open up the conversation, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Right.
And so I love seeing somebody rock their sobriety and just being like, you know what, rock their recovery. I want to go, because I saw something the other day. There's a difference between recovery and sobriety.
Big difference.
And a lot of times that gets people think, well, I'm sober. Well, okay. Which is a feat and a wonderful
thing.
That
can be a tremendous accomplishment.
Yep. But recovery is doing something with your sobriety.
It's a lifestyle. It's a total change in how you live your life.
And, and we've said this before, anybody can do a diet. And a diet will work as long as you just do that thing.
White knuckle it. You can do it.
I'm going on a cruise. I want to look good. I'm going to do a 15-day cleanse. I'm going to stay away from carbs. And for the first day on that ship, I'm going to look good.
You can do extreme things for short periods of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people attack their sobriety like that. And it works until it doesn't
get
work.
You started, maybe.
Yeah.
Something like that.
But you really need to think of it as a lifestyle change. Diets will not work. They'll work for what they're intended to, but you will gain the weight back.
I mean, let's look at Oprah. She's struggled with her weight. Diet, she's gone down, she's gone up. She has all the resources in the world, right? More than anybody probably, to keep her eating right and exercising. But that diet yo-yo has been tough for her, and it is for all of us, for sure.
So it's got to be a lifestyle change.
Well, and sobriety can be sobriety in many ways, I think, while I think it's healthier than being in addiction, of course, it can also be a really unpleasant, unhappy part of life. There may be reasons why a person utilized drugs and alcohol because their life is hard.
Well, there's a term for it. It's called a dry drunk.
Right.
And
so if
a
you're
dry drunk is just not using, but he hasn't addressed any of the issues that he was using
right,
the alcohol
he's just kind
to
of
cope.
hanging on. He might have been hanging on through addiction. Now he's hanging on through sobriety. And granted, that's better than being in active addiction. But you're right. We call it dry because they're not happy. They're not progressing. You know, that it's not necessarily a progressive part of life. You may be still contemplating, I want to drink or I want to use because my life is still hard. Nothing's really improved except for that I'm sober.
Or you would be saying to yourself, my life would be so much better if I could just have a drink.
Right.
And I can't, so now I'm going to sit here on my couch. I'm going to yell at kids to get off my lawn, and life's just miserable.
I'm thinking I'm going to look into this, and if there isn't research on this, maybe I could talk to someone about doing a study. But if we could identify the difference between somebody who's sober versus somebody who's in recovery, and if we could differentiate those two, I wonder what the relapse rate is for those. I'll bet you, my theory would be that if you're just in sobriety, but you're not really in recovery, your relapse rate is much higher, risk of relapse, versus people who have shifted into recovery, meaning it's a new lifestyle, it's a new perspective. They feel like their life is progressing in a healthy manner, and sobriety is a subset of that, but they're doing a lot of other things like so many of our guests on the show. I'll bet that dramatically decreases relapse.
My first year out of rehab, I would consider myself sober. Years 2 and 3 is when I started to work into recovery. I was always trying to work into it, but that first year out of rehab was just my goal. Number one goal was to stay sober. That was my number one goal. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was working to getting my life back and all that stuff, but it doesn't just happen overnight.
No.
And so, but my main goal I need to get to this year. And I wasn't even sure what I was going to do after the year.
Right. I was going to say, listeners of the podcast, if they remember, our check-ins back in that first year, it was all just trying to pull yourself together. A lot of it was financial stress and couldn't drive and
emotional stress,
a lot of emotional stress,
relationships, and just trying to manage and navigate.
And I'll be honest, one of the terrible things you do is you downplay problems in your life, which is also an awesome thing that you do because you're an optimist. But I think the listeners, they don't really know how hard some of relationship issues were for you during that first year. I think you and I both tend towards the optimist side of life, and so we tend to focus on the positive. But we could have spent a lot of episodes just talking about the struggles and the people that weren't supportive of you during that first year.
So I remember a conversation with my girlfriend, and she had to tell her ex-husband that she was dating me. And now I'm good friends with this guy, and he's a wonderful guy. But he was like, you think this is a good idea to have this guy around our kids?
Right. Oh, yeah.
And I was like, I don't blame him. I can tell you that I'm being honest and true, and my intentions are pure. But yeah, I get where you're coming from, bro. Yeah, that's not a fun conversation to have. And I remember looking at my girlfriend and going, I'm doing everything I can, and she's like, how tough was it for her?
Well, she had only started dating you
2 months.
2 months before you
got into rehab.
Yeah.
She didn't even know I was an alcoholic.
Well, she found out.
Yeah. Well, along with the whole state.
Everybody else.
Yeah,
She woke up and she was like, whoa.
Hey, my boyfriend's got a mugshot.
Yeah.
This is not good.
It's fresh.
Yeah. And so, there was times that I had to take my daughter's bike to the grocery store to get milk because they needed.
That's a good look with the basket, right?
Yeah, it was orange. It was creamsicle.
Yeah.
And I had to go. And those were the things. I remember walking to my kid's school to see my son perform in the 3rd grade play. And everybody else and I'm walking.
Yeah.
And that was just one of those things that I go, I got myself here. This is what I need to do, and I'm not going to let him down.
That's that trying to stay sober, trying to deal with the fallout of everything that's happened in your life. The reason I sort of tease you about not talking about that is it's good to remind the listeners that if they're struggling with those things or they know someone who is, that's normal.
It could have been easy just to sit on the couch and scream at everybody and say, why did you do this to me?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Some of it was fair, some of it was unfair, but I go, that's not going to get me where I need to be. And so whatever it takes, I'm going to do. And that's like probably the second week into rehab where I go, okay, whatever you guys tell me to do, I'm going to do it. Everything that I've tried didn't work.
That's the best attitude.
So
just give up and give in and
let's
work hard.
let's give somebody else a shot at running me for a while and see how that goes.
They did a good job.
I think so. I'm very happy and pleased with my progress. I know I'm not done, and I've got a long ways to go.
Well, it's a lifestyle change, and I think that's why we call this show Project Recovery, is we want to focus on it's not good enough to just be sober, especially for the person who's doing it. Like your life can be so much better than just sober.
Yeah. And right now, I'm having a wonderful life, and I'm really enjoying it. Before we get to our guest, May is Mental Health Awareness Month.
That's right.
And you brought a little quiz that we should be asking ourselves?
Well, I have a challenge.
Okay.
And I think we'll do this throughout the month, have a little challenge. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. I think every month's Mental Health Awareness Month for me, because that's what I do. So I forget to sort of highlight May sometimes on our show. But here's a challenge.
Okay.
One of the biggest problems in mental health awareness is that we don't talk about it within our families. So we don't talk about, like, within families, if grandpa died of heart disease or cancer, we usually talk about those things, like if we have a propensity towards, things running in our family for physical diseases. But mental health issues we rarely talk about, usually, and because I know this for a fact, because when I visit with a patient for the first time, and sometimes in subsequent visits, I want to ask and have to ask about family history. So I had a conversation with a person today about psychosis and does it run in their family? And of course, what did the lady say? She didn't know. She's like, I don't know. Like, my uncle had some problems. Well, describe them for me. Well, he went to a hospital. What kind of hospital? I don't know. Like, there's not a conversation that would empower her to be able to talk about propensities like depression, anxiety, psychosis, substance abuse and addiction, those kinds of things that might run in our families. So here's the challenge. The challenge is, if you are, I guess at any age, but especially if you're a parent or a grandparent, take this month as an opportunity to sit and write down what you know about your family histories of mental health and share it with your family members. If you have to send out an email, that might be a weird email or a text to send to everybody, or talk to them one-on-one and just say, this is what I know about what grandpa went through, or what your aunt went through, or, what your mom and I have gone through. Like, talk to your kids. And if you're a young adult and you wonder about your family history, the challenge goes in reverse. Ask your parents, ask your grandparents, talk about it. It shouldn't be shameful. It should be empowering, because if we know what runs in our family, if you know that every generation of men in your family have died of a heart attack, don't eat bacon, right?
Yeah.
Like, you need to be told, the bacon's not for you, buddy. Like, let's work on our cholesterol and all that kind of stuff.
If alcoholism runs in the family,
have
that conversation when your kid's young, so they know what they might be signing up for.
If depression runs in your family, you need to know and what the signs are for young children, teenagers, young adults.
But I think most of the time as parents, we kind of bite our tongue and cross our fingers and hope it doesn't go to the generation after us.
Yeah, well,
that's
we can hope, but guess what? There are biological factors, there are heritability factors, and we do model lifestyle whether we realize it or not. And so those things continue to put generation after generation at risk, sort of blindly. The kids growing up don't know. Mm-hmm. And so that's my challenge for that's today's challenge for Mental Health Awareness Month. Be more aware. Share it or ask about it, but talk about mental health history in your family.
I love it. Hey, our guest today, his name is Jared Shaw. He runs a company called Recovery Strong, and he
and I have something in common.
Both from Oregon?
That's right.
Yeah. I was going to say handsome, but
yeah.
Well, Josh, you're handsome too. He's looking at what about me?
I don't think Jared's in a sort of a class of his own,
We're going to find out more about Jared's story and how he got to just about 8 years of sobriety in just a few seconds. You're listening to Project Recovery right here on KSL. Hey, welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. He's a clinical psychologist. Our guest today is Jared Shaw. He's the founder of Recovery Strong. You know what? Ever since I've been in the recovery world, your name pops up all the time. People are like, do you know Jared Shaw? He's doing these amazing things. And so I've tried to get you on the podcast a while ago. It didn't work out, but I'm happy to have you.
Thanks for inviting me again.
So where does the story of Jared Shaw begin?
Well, Davis County boy, grew up in Fruit Heights, went to Davis High. I'm going to fit the profile of a perfect alcoholic addict, middle child of 6, right in the middle, got lost in the shuffle. And just, but I had a good family. I had a great growing up, we never went without. But for some reason, I am the only one affected by drugs and alcohol in my family. I am the one who has this cross to bear, but I love it, Now I do. It was a lot of hell
growing
for a long
up,
time.
Being the middle child, and you said you felt left out, lost in the shuffle.
My brother was a better soccer player than I was. So, 2 years older than me. So I was always the guy in the shadow, So, yeah.
And let's not underestimate that. That's kind of a tough thing for a kid growing up because everybody growing up, you need to feel important and validated, and that's why kids and young teens often try out lots of different sports or music, or they're trying to find something,
their niche,
that they shine at, because that's how we develop our self-concept. So I've talked to a lot of people who have an extraordinary older sibling who kind of ate up the spotlight. And sometimes that was really egged on by parents, and sometimes it was just the perception of the kid, but, who've had older siblings that were amazing students or athletes or musicians. They just shone in some way that was amazing. And that can really make your own personal identity development a struggle. And I'm wondering if that's what you meant by that.
Yeah, and it was me. My parents were at every soccer game. They showed up to everything I ever did. It wasn't that they chose him over me. It was like you said, it was the perception of me. I'm in the shadow, and so they were 100% supportive. I never went without. I got to go do all the things I wanted to. But the fear, of not being good enough, the younger brother syndrome type thing,
the negative talk.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff that I still deal with today that I have to work on, but living in the, in the shadow of the spotlight, so that's one thing I've dealt with.
So at an early age, did you feel like an outsider?
Not necessarily. I felt like I had a lot to offer, but yet I couldn't do it. I don't know why. I always thought that I have more to give to this world. Even, when I got sober, that was the same thing. I've always felt like I have more to give, but I'm holding myself back, and that can go into a lot of things I do in my life today. But I just feel like that, trying to word this correctly, the confidence level was not there.
What kind of things did you do as a kid? So you mentioned soccer. Did you play soccer?
Played soccer, Davis High. Got kicked off the soccer team for smoking marijuana.
Okay.
So, in my senior year.
All right.
I think that was it. And maybe it was because of grades, but if we go down, it was because of marijuana that I didn't get good grades, and then I get kicked off the soccer team. But after that, so the identity thing, my brother was a great soccer player. He tried out for the U.S. national team, stuff like that. So that's kind of what I'm dealing with, so there's a lot of spotlight on him. But so after I got kicked off the soccer team my senior year, I kind of wanted to be a cowboy. I went the cowboy route. So I was like, I'm not going to go do anything my other family's doing. I'm going to, plow my own path. And so I went and did the cowboy thing. And, and just that was fun because I finally was able to build an identity. And then the whole cycle started over because I was friends with guys that were professional rodeo cowboys who were making money.
So I was going to ask you, because I grew up in Morgan.
Yeah.
So when you say I wanted to be a cowboy, what was that vision in your head? Because some people, when they say I want to be a cowboy, it's the rodeo life, right?
Yeah.
Like they're going to do that. Other people,
Yellowstone,
right? They're going to have their cattle. So what was your vision of like, I want to be a cowboy? Because I dare say you're the first person on our show in 3 years that was like, I want to be a cowboy.
Lane Frost.
Yeah, well, I used to love 8 Seconds. But so we had a little piece between my grandpa's house and my house. There was a quarter acre. He had a swimming pool, basketball court. All the guys at Davis High would come play on the basketball court. They'd swim. There was a piece of property right there. And I was like, I'm going to build a horse corral. I build a horse corral. I'm going to buy a horse. I guess this is the ambitious side of me. So I got a horse, you know.
That's pretty ambitious,
So
yeah.
I wanted to just be a cowboy. So then I went, and later on in life, I went to Jackson Hole and lived in a tent on the mountain right out of high school. So, because I didn't want to go on a mission, I didn't want to go to school. I did trips up there on the mountain I didn't know how to saddle a horse at that point. So it was all like, hey, you want to work for me? I'm like, yeah. So, you know, I learned everything from that. And then I started hanging out with the rodeo cowboys in Farmington. And then that's when I learned how to rope, and then bought some horses, you know. So
you did learn how to do all that stuff.
Oh, yeah. I went to rodeos. I was been at the NFR. I've been sponsored by Coors Light for partying. You know, that's a whole other thing. It's a very interesting side of my life back when I could use and drink and it was okay. But then the bottom fell out, you know, about that same time. But,
As it often does.
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of this does come back to, I mean, a lot of your life path, I don't want to overemphasize what you said at the very beginning, but everything you've said so far in your like life path trajectory is about identity. You're like, I don't want to be like everybody else.
Yeah.
I want to be different than my family. And holy cow, you did it. I mean, you headed out. Like, you built a corral, you got a horse, you moved away, you learned to rope. I mean, you really jumped in with both feet.
Jared, I want to ask you something because it's something that I just dawned on me, but my identity was known as the partier.
Yeah.
And it was something that I excelled in. And you know what I mean? And I was really good at it until I wasn't. But I mean, I was the guy that when they said, hey, if we're going to have a party, we've got to have Casey.
Yeah.
You know, if we're going to do this, we're going to have Casey because he brings the fun.
Yeah.
And that became my identity.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that somewhat became your identity too? Or were you drinking then to... Why were you drinking?
Well, so let's go back a little bit to like my first drug use, you know, in high school. So I didn't drink alcohol pretty much until I was probably a junior in high school. You know, I always was taught, don't drink, you'll get addicted, or don't use drugs, you'll get addicted. Don't drink.
Sounds like you grew up in a
LDS home. LDS home.
The standard was no alcohol, no drugs.
So it scared me, you know, and I remember being in church one day when I was a young kid saying, I will never touch that stuff, you know, because I was taught that. And so, but then something in me, like, I want to be different, you know. So, but the first time I ever got high was an accidental high. It was an accident. My mom had some Lortabs in the kitchen or in her cupboard, which is a typical story. And I had a headache that morning. I was a senior. I was a junior in high school, but I took one Lortab when we built the portables for Davis High. And that was my first class, carpentry. And I just remember that feeling when I got to school. I was up on the roof and everything just went away. Like it was but at that point I had no idea what that feeling was, you know, and I didn't chase that feeling for, you know, a while. That was, and then I started partying, you know, then my buddy's dad was a pharmacist too. And so after I realized, okay, the drug was what made me feel so good, you know, maybe I'm naive today, but back then I didn't really understand it. But then as I was introduced to more drugs and what pills could do to me without having alcohol in my breath, because that's what I could do is take pills and not smell, and my parents wouldn't know because that would be bad if I smell like alcohol. You know, so there's a lot of that. But then in high school, my senior year, that's when everything fell out the bottom. You know, that's when I got kicked off the team. My buddy would bring pills to school from his dad's pharmacy. He would just grab a grip of pills, and I don't know what I was taking. All I know is they worked really well, you know. And that's
which is dangerous as heck.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
but that's the adolescent mindset, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm 50, so like if I'm taking something, I like reading the bottle, and you know, like I don't know if I want to take this. Is it gonna mess with my sleep or whatever? Like I'm nervous about vitamins. But when you're a teenager, it's that impulse. You're so impulsive.
You think you're bulletproof.
You think you're bulletproof and all of that stuff. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to teenagers where they say, I took some pills, and I say, well, what did you take? And they're like, I don't know. They were the pills my friend gave me. And I'm like, so you took a bunch of pills that you didn't know what they were? And they're like, yeah, but that's not uncommon for that age, right?
Yeah, I'm lucky. I don't know what I mean, looking back, probably just, you know, Lortabs and some muscle relaxers. But I was watching a show the other day on TV about the fentanyl thing. You know, like if I was a kid today, I'd be dead. You know, because I don't know what I'm taking for sure. And, you know, and it's just a scary time to be doing that kind of stuff because you don't know what's in pills anymore. But, you know, luckily there were some scary times, you know, when I got hooked on Oxycontin, that's when my life went, you know, goes back to the cowboy story. selling my horse that I bred and thinking I was going to buy a better horse, but I ended up buying Oxycontin with the money, So it's kind of the whole thing. That time of my life just really went away, and just my identity changed. I became the drug addict.
How many Oxycontin can you get for a horse?
I don't remember back in the day.
There's
I don't
probably
remember
a ratio.
I was like,
there's probably an app. You can look it up.
Yeah. So
that was traumatic, You sell a horse that you bred and you give away. You're expecting. I don't know. I remember laying in the field with this baby horse after we had her when I was drunk. I came home and I couldn't go into but I remember this little horse let me lay on its belly in a field.
Oh man.
And then it would follow me around. But I remember that feeling like I had somebody that night that kind of understood me for some.
It's a connection. Yeah. Animals, and then I got, especially horses, yeah. Wow, that's a heartbreaker.
I wrote about it in my journal the first time I went to rehab about selling that horse for Oxycontin.
That must have been a heartbreaker.
Yeah.
That's harsh.
So junior year, your first introduction. By your senior year, you said the bottom had fallen out.
Yeah, kind of just
falling out with your parents, falling out with school, your friends.
I think just giving up on. I didn't want to go to school. I barely graduated, And the only reason I did graduate because my grandpa was a high school teacher there, and he pulled some strings, and I was able to walk. I didn't even want to go to graduation, and I think I got an alcohol ticket my graduation night, but the bottom fell out. That's when things started professing themselves that I had issues, but I still didn't know what was wrong with me. Because all my other friends are going on missions and all this stuff, but I still thought that I was okay. I just had some issues, but I didn't know what those issues were. Because I was an alcoholic, going back to talking about your challenge. Alcoholism doesn't run in a Mormon family. So
as far as you know.
Yeah.
Wink, wink.
Yeah, I say that with... Yeah, anyway, but so learning about my past, I'm going to take that challenge because I know a little bit about it, but not as far as I'm concerned, I'm the first person that admits that I'm an alcoholic in my family.
Well, and let's be honest about that. Culture plays a big role.
Yeah.
Predispositions towards addiction run in families, but if you have a family history of non-use because of religious belief, then you may be carrying some genetic predisposition and not realize it. So it can be a little bit harder to identify, but you might look at other sort of addictive behaviors that do run in them. So in LDS families, you might look at food addictions, people, caffeine addictions, pill addictions, because those sorts of things might sneak in for a person that has a predisposition to addiction. Because they're either prescribed by a doctor, so perceived as okay, or they are technically okay because it's just Wendy's, it's not marijuana, and those sorts of predispositions towards addiction might manifest in sort of subtle other ways. But yeah, it can be a little bit harder to identify in those families.
Yeah.
You're listening to Project Recovery. Our guest today is Jared Shaw. We're going to hear more of his story in just a few seconds. Welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. Our guest today is Jared Shaw. He's talking about his early days of using substances and alcohol. How long into your partying ways did alcohol get introduced?
Well, probably about the first night I drank alcohol was probably junior year, the same time. But I didn't use that as much as I did pills because, like I said, we couldn't, you can smell alcohol. But the first time I drank, it was Zima. And my buddy's parents owned the cafe at the Davis County Golf Course, and we'd go in and steal beer from that place. And so I drank a Zima and decided to go talk to the police officer at the 7-Eleven on Main Street and 200 North, thinking, oh, that's Officer Barlow. He likes me. I was just very charismatic with one drink. And I go up, talk to him, and he's like, "Are you been drinking?" And I'm I'm just like, I'm an idiot. I'm talking to a cop, and my first time I drank. And so I get
moment of realization.
So I'm like, the first time I drank, I get a ticket. So that same night, let's go down to Salt Lake. Let's go down to one of the clubs. I can't remember if this is the Bay or something like that. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, I already got an alcohol ticket. Doesn't matter. So we go down the Bay. We're drinking and get another ticket that night because cops are watching us across the street. And I even told the cop, I'm like, I've already got a ticket day. You can't give me another one. And he said, that's not true.
That's not how that works.
So I'm 2 for 2 on that, on the first time I drank. So it was an expensive
Cops
drink.
love to be told what they can't do, by the way.
I don't know if you know this, but you can't give me one. I've already got one.
They were watching me from a hotel parking lot, and I just was like, oh my gosh. But anyway, looking back, I laugh at it. But that was huge because I didn't want my parents to find out. I didn't know how I was going to pay for these tickets, you know. So
You're
that
like
was the
17
first,
maybe.
yeah. And I didn't have a job at that time. I didn't know how to work, and so that was huge. But you know, that was my first introduction to drinking, and so I realized if I use pills, I don't get in as much trouble. You can't smell it, and so that's when I started taking pills, and then alcohol. Was never the big thing I used other than when we go to rodeos. That's what you do at rodeos. You go and drink. But when Oxycontin came about, that's when Oxy was my drug of choice.
Let me ask you a question. So you've mentioned two things that make me suspicious of something else.
Oh boy.
So you mentioned the one Zima. I'm really sorry that you have to say that Zima was your first drink.
We called it cheerleader beer.
No, you go here.
Okay. So you're drinking Zima. We're trying not to laugh. And you have one Zima and you get a little tipsy and you go, all of a sudden I was charismatic.
Yeah.
Okay. Then the other thing that tipped my interest was you said when you took that first opioid, Lortab or whatever, you were on top of you were doing the construction and you just felt like everything went away, your words. So my question is, do you feel like up until that point as a kid, part of feeling different had to do with some underlying anxiety that you weren't aware of?
Yes. You know, I remember being at Davis High because my brother was older. I remember being scared every day going to school. Yet a lot of people liked me. You know, I didn't have any reason to be scared. I didn't have to have anxiety.
You weren't getting bullied.
No,
or picked
I wasn't.
on.
The only time I remember ever getting bullied was when I went into the locker room that sophomores weren't supposed to go into, and I was getting threatened to get an ice bath from one of the high school football guys. But I remember hearing that, and I thought that meant I was going to get shot. You know, that fear because I was new in high school. But I remember
that ice bath meant.
Yeah, I was so scared. I didn't know what they were going to do to me.
How the gangsters roll at
yeah,
Davis
exactly.
High. Yeah.
And so, and I expected my older brother to put a stop to that. You know, I remember being doing my driver's ed course, and the football coach was my driver. And I remember it was my first time probably opening up in a way and saying, hey, they said they're going to do this to me, but I didn't get any response, you know? And so it was like, okay, don't talk about your problems or anything. So but I remember being fearful every day going to school at that point. And
that's interesting. So you tried to open up and he didn't really.
He did. Yeah. He
talked to you about it.
It just kind of validated hey, they don't care. They're not going to do anything for you right now, you know? So just deal with it.
That's kind of what I thought, because it's interesting how people who, and I don't have a stat or a research article on my mind to support this, but it seems in my practice and here on the show, people who have that aha moment when they take an opioid for the first time and they say, like what you said, everything went away, or I all of a sudden felt like I could relax and talk to people, you know, that often is the release or relief from anxiety. And a lot of people misunderstand anxiety as like, you know, it's OCD and hand washing, or it's specific worries that sometimes it's more in your body. A lot of people have just that fearful, uncomfortable, hesitant, every day, is everything going to be okay, vigilant, like looking around. And then they realize, I don't really have a reason to be this way, to feel this tension and fear, but I feel it all the time. And then you have a drink or you have a pill, and all of a sudden, boom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I, like I said, I wouldn't have known what that was.
No, of course, nobody talks about that.
Now maybe you can, because
yeah.
of the way that the stigma is being broken. But yeah, at that
How
time.
How old of a guy were you, or are you now, and were you?
I am 40 years old. I forget. I turned 40 last year. Yeah.
Okay, so you were going to high school through the mid to late 90s.
Yeah, I graduated in 2000.
Yeah, and so I'm a decade older than you, but that was the height of the opioid crisis. I mean, maybe not the very, but that's when it all of a sudden became a big problem. Yeah.
Yeah, because in 2003-ish, 2004, that's when I got addicted to Oxycontin, and that's when things really helped me out a lot.
You've mentioned Oxycontin a couple of times. Yeah. How did you get introduced to it?
I'd probably taken it before with the buddy who'd given me pills, but it was up at, I want to say college, up at Utah State when I graduated, and I wanted to be a vet, you know, being a cowboy. I was trying to go up to Utah State and do that. I wanted to be a equine veterinarian and work on racehorses. That was my goal. And I started using Oxycontin up there first year. And at this time I started a construction company. And I'm not sure if the timeline is exact, but it doesn't really matter. But Oxycontin was the best thing that ever happened to me at that time in my life, because it got me to all those things we talked about. It let go of the anxiety. I could go to class. I could do things. It worked good for 4 months, and then it ripped everything out from my life, you know? And so that's the one drug that really took me down fast and hard. And then still not understanding that I was an addict, because that was a bad word to me, or an alcoholic. It took going to rehab to learn about addiction, you know, and that was tough though. But I used to watch my friends. I had a buddy who went to treatment, and I was so jealous of him that he got to go to treatment, because I was just stuck in this cycle of buying drugs, and I just didn't know what was wrong with me. And then I remember being jealous when he said I'd go into rehab tomorrow, because I bought pills off him, and I was like, I want to go get help, you know, but I didn't know how to at that point. And my sister had a huge impact on getting me help. So
on the podcast, people usually describe their rock bottom.
Okay.
What does yours look like?
Oh man, there's been a couple. You know, the first time I ever went to treatment, I was 24 years old, and that was when I pawned everything. My family I stole my sister's wakeboards. Everything I owned of value was in a pawn shop. My company, I started a construction company at that time and couldn't even open a checking account. Went to Mesquite to gamble and play, you know, going down to a rodeo, and lost thousands of dollars. And at that time, my brother was employing me as well. I stole money from his company. And finally, when I got back, they had a meeting at my sister's dance studio that you know about. Upstairs. There was a whole group of my family up there, basically an intervention. And my grandpa was there, all my family was there, and it was, what's wrong with you, Jared? What's wrong with you? You know, and I was like, nothing's wrong with me. You know, what's wrong with you guys? And finally, we were all yelling back and forth, and my sister Kim walks upstairs, and she just says, Jared, do you need help? And that was kind of like the first time I was like, somebody came at me with a little different approach, a softer approach. And I don't know if I was just ready at that time, but it was the right words at the right time and the right tone. And I just broke down and I said, yes, you know, and that day I was in treatment 3 days later. You know, I didn't stay sober for more than 2 years, but that's when I was introduced to a program of recovery. And I finally tasted a life that I thought could be had, you know, and it was beautiful. I loved going to rehab. I loved learning about myself and what was wrong with me. And that lasted for almost 2 years. And then my grandpa died, and I kind of went back out at that point.
You know, sometimes sort of in a superficial joking manner, you meet somebody cool and you say, oh, we really vibed. You use that term, we vibe with each other, that kind of thing. But I think there is something to that. And I think a lot of times people have an experience like you just described, where I would call it pre-conscious awareness. You're not really aware. You're not really thinking the words, I need help. But it's sort of back there. It's just kind of, it's on a wavelength, you know. And when your sister came in with that soft approach and said, you need help, I think that speaks to that. And it brings it from pre-conscious to conscious awareness. And it feels different. Like you said, all of a sudden it was like, sometimes we call that, you know, an epiphany or insight, but it's when those two vibes connect and you're on the same wavelength for a moment, it can do powerful things. And that's why sometimes families are smart to, your family's great for loving you enough to all meet there and try to have an intervention. But sometimes families would benefit from having somebody help them because you're more like, you know, an interventionist to help create that connection. Because if you can connect with the addict on their wavelength, if you can bring their pre-consciousness up to their awareness and hit that vibe, and because you knew somewhere inside of you, you're like, something's wrong. Yeah. I need help. But when people are aggressive, what do? You know, we push back.
Oh yeah, walls come up.
Yeah, so that's cool.
I'm curious about the 2 years of sobriety you had, and you said you got a taste of what life could be.
Yeah, you know, I did. It was hard. You know, I was ready when I went into treatment. When my up in Park City, it was inpatient 60 days. I I was all in. I wanted to learn about what was wrong with me. That's when I was introduced to the 12 steps. I was introduced to the disease model. I was introduced to a lot of things that finally I was like, oh, this is what's wrong with me. There's something.
This is why I do what I do.
There's stuff behind this. There's consequences and reasons. But so I did 60 days inpatient, did 90 days outpatient, driving to Park City 4 times a night. Now I couldn't afford it because of gas prices. But I was willing to do whatever. And honestly, first time I went to rehab, I graduated, had a lifetime guarantee scholarship, whatever you call it. And that was the first thing that I was proud of that I graduated from. My whole family was there, and I've graduated from 2 rehabs. And so those are my proudest days of my life, and I joke about it, but it's the best thing that's ever happened to me,
I get it.
And
but in that 2 years that you were sober, did things get better with your family? Did they get better?
They got more educated as I did. They didn't jump in like, we had free family groups and they could have gone and learned. My parents did their best, and I remember being resentful, but that they didn't jump in as much as I did. But then I had a cool sponsor that taught me, you got to just do what you can do. You can't blame them for stuff anymore, So I jumped in. They kind of stayed a little bit less involved. I think that they're still learning about recovery. This second time around, they're learning a lot more about it because I'm more open. I feel like I'm more mature, honestly. Like I wasn't ready to stay sober, I don't think, at that point in my life.
I guess what I'm curious is that after the 2 years and then your grandfather passing away, it sounds like you took that pretty hard.
Yeah, we were best friends.
And then you go back out. What was the family like after you went out the second time?
I was good at faking like I was still sober for a while. They kind of backed off at that point because they thought I was doing good. And that was the hard thing is I almost had 2 years and then all of a sudden I'm not celebrating my sobriety birthdays anymore. I'm supposed to be sober, but I'm not, and it all started again with one Lortab. I was on a construction site. One of my employees asked me if I wanted to buy a Lortab. And I said, yeah, I haven't done Lortabs in almost 2 years now. So it started with a Lortab again, and then from that day on, it went to 5 Lortabs. And then I don't think I did Oxy very much at that point. It was mostly just buying pills and taking copious amounts of Lortab 10s, buying 20, 30, 60 at a time and swallowing them all at once,
Whoa.
And with the Tylenol in it, it was a long 5-year run. And when we talk about a new bottom, that bottom was just a spiritual and physical and just like, I'm going to die bottom. I didn't get pulled over. I didn't get in any wrecks. I didn't lose anything other than just who I was again. And so finally when I had enough and I just checked back into treatment. There's a lot of between there's a lot of stuff that happened. And I can share one story, of one day my dealer couldn't get 10 milligram hydrocodone, and so I had to buy 5s. And so to get my dose, I had to take double the amount of hydrocodones to get what I usually take. And so I'm taking that much more Tylenol. I remember throwing up bile in Farmington. We were on a street project, and my body was shutting down, and I started puking, and bile was coming up, and I had no idea what was wrong with me once again. When you're throwing up out of your truck and it's green, I've never seen it before. It freaked me out. And so I go to my grandma's house and I'm like, I'm just going to sleep this off. Lay down for 3 hours and then get back up and I still don't feel good. And so I call poison control because I'm scared. And they said, you need to get to the hospital quick. So I went to the Davis County Hospital, told them what I took, was completely honest with them, and they pulled all my blood, and they wanted the lady was in there, the nurse was telling me what happens if you go into liver failure and you get life flighted up to the U, and I'm bawling, I'm praying, I'll never do this again, like scared as I could ever be. Doctor comes back and says, did you buy Lortabs? And I was like, yeah. And he said, you don't have any Tylenol in your system. And I said, well, I know I could feel it. I could feel the Lortabs. I had that feeling, but he said, you must metabolize Tylenol really well. And so at that point, all my prayers of I'm never doing this again. I walked out of that hospital like busting the doors open, like I got a liver that can handle this stuff. Sorry, mute button.
No, you're.
That's
I went from.
But isn't that how crazy the addict brain?
Meek and humble to I will do whatever I need to stay alive today. To whoa, I've got Superman liver. I'm going. You know, I remember calling my dealer on the way out and getting more. You know, and. But I couldn't. Let's go back to the way I felt in the hospital. I couldn't call my parents at that time because they thought I was sober. That's back to the alone feeling of they think I'm sober. I'm not. I'm alone. How do I? Because I've let them down again. You know, I've screwed up again. You know, so that's what I remember that feeling. You know, mostly. But you know, I'm alive today, and that's what I love about what I do today. Because
I bet that doctor was. If he's listening to the show, he's like, that's not the message I wanted you to take from this.
I know. It was.
Right.
Yeah.
But isn't that interesting how the addict brain works that way?
Yeah.
And you can so quickly go from begging and pleading and making every deal with God possible to like, oh, I'm okay. Oh, no, I'm good. I got this. Yeah. You know, I'm fine.
Stay back there for a minute. I'll need you again soon.
So did you go back to the same rehab you went to the first time?
I did an outpatient because at this time I had a bigger construction company. I was able to grow things, you know.
Let's pause on this for a second, okay? All right. So this 24-year-old kid starts a construction company, and you're starting another construction company. And you're making, like, that's impressive. That's another commonality that I know we've talked about before with people that come on this show. Is you guys are kind of all in on stuff. When I was 24, I wasn't starting a company. I don't think that even crossed my mind to know how to do that.
The same thing that makes us successful business people is the same thing that makes us wonderful addicts.
Right.
It's the all-in mentality.
And it's what makes you great in recovery. But isn't that interesting how there's such a common thread? I pointed out one earlier, which is a lot of folks have this natural, biologically driven anxiety that they don't even realize is that big of a problem until they get a relief from it. And then the other one is just this all-out personality trait where you are just all in. So the fact that you just kind of nonchalant, so I started another construction company.
Actually grew it.
It grew it, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to kind of point that out that sometimes our strengths can be our weaknesses.
Yeah, there's, I guess I'm an entrepreneur. I've got 3 businesses that I do, and I feel like I'm pretty humble about it. But I didn't know what else to do with my life. I didn't want to work. I tell people I would be the worst employee. Like people like, you need to come work for us. I'm like, no, you don't want me to work for you. I will be your worst employee. But if I can work for me, I'm pretty good at it. So, but yeah, the construction company and going back to Oxycontin, when I started this construction company, I was a runner for a huge law firm up here. I've actually delivered papers to this building when I was like 20 years old, 21. I was a runner for the attorneys, and it was a perfect job because I could use, buy my Oxycontin. But I remember being on the phone whenever I would do Oxy, I could call some of the people. I was starting my business at that time. It gave me confidence. I could go in, and I don't want to get too graphic, but I'd go in and I'd use, and it made me feel like I was in an attorney's office, and it made me feel like I was
powerful.
Yes.
Well, you're pulling one over on everybody, right? Because you're around a bunch of attorneys, but they don't know what you're doing.
Oh, yeah.
And that's that sort of sneaky, empowering feeling like, aha, these guys, they can't touch me kind of thing, right?
Oh, man.
And, that's so interesting that you bring that up because you have that drive and desire to be an entrepreneur. You're all out, but the anxiety, kind of pushes the brakes, and then you take something and all of a sudden it's gone, and you can do all these amazing things. Yeah. So that reinforces the use, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you have something that's sort of holding you back, you take a pill and that thing goes away, and all of a sudden you just crush it at whatever you wanted to do. That's behavioral reinforcement at its finest. Like, of course you're going to want to do it again. Yeah. So it's not just a biological addiction. It becomes a psychological addiction too. Yeah,
and I took it as it helped me benefit because if I could make more money, because Oxycontin was not cheap at that time, being a runner at a law firm, if I could make more money, my eyes, I could do more drugs, and the more money I made, the more drugs I could do, and it all worked out. And then it didn't. It worked out
until it doesn't.
Until it didn't. So, so the construction company, I grew that. And what was your question? Sorry, we're going back to.
So you went to an outpatient treatment center. And so at this point, did you tell your parents that you relapsed, or were you trying to do this under the radar?
I think I just didn't care anymore. I was done. And I didn't care if people knew. I mean, there's probably a little bit of that behind it, but I knew I was going to die. That was the bottom line. I knew that if I would wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and check my face and make sure my eyes weren't yellow and my body wasn't turning yellow from liver failure. And, and if that was not today, then I have another day ahead of me. But then finally I kept calling the treatment center and I said, I need help, and then they got me in. It was January 5th, 2015, and that was the last time I ever used. And I drove every day to outpatient, running a company every night down to Sandy at this point. We did 5 days a week. I think I did 9 to 12 months of outpatient treatment center, didn't miss anything. I watched one of my really good friends die at 3 months in from, liver failure. But at that point, like I said, I just knew I wasn't going to survive. I don't have any more in me. I wanted something different in my life. And ever since that day, my life has just been awesome. And it was the best thing I ever did in my life, was to get sober. The second time.
And how is with the family now? Because I know your sister, because my kids take dance from her.
Yeah.
And I've met your mom, and I know they are so proud of you. They're on board.
Yeah.
They love you.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna tell you a story that happened. This might get emotional, but the other day, so my mom was on her way to St. George on Monday, and so I was down. I used to give my mom a hard time. My parents, they weren't very good parents, but they were awesome, and I held a lot of resentment for my failings because of them. But I remember driving down by Ponds Park in Kaysville, and there used to be an old metal slide there on the hill, and I drove by there the other day, and it was a little hill with just a new feature on top of it. They got rid of the old slide, but I pictured myself as a little boy at that park, and my mom was with me, and I remember going down this slide, and my mom was there, and just the feeling I had that right there, just going back in time, like remembering, like me, there was two things I remember. My mom being there, and that I love myself. And my mom was on her way to St. George, and I was like, I need to call my mom and tell this story. And I didn't want to because it's hard for me. And sorry, I'm trying not to cry too, because I shared this in my Recovery Strong group the other night, and it was hard. But I just called her up, and I just told my mom, I said, Mom, remember that slide you used to take me to? And she said, yeah. And I said, thanks for taking me there that day. And you were a good mom. And, and I just started crying, and she started crying, and we just had a moment. And I don't do that very often. And it was one, to be able to give my mom feedback and tell her I love her and tell her thank you for all that she's done. That's probably the most important phone call she's had in a long time from me, or ever. And for me to be able to look at myself on that slide and be okay with who I was, and just try to remember that little kid. Be like, you know what? You love yourself. You're good enough. You can do what you need to do. Be a little easier on yourself today. So there's a couple of lessons I had, but that slide, for some reason, the last 3 days has been stuck in my mind, and just, I don't know. It's just been cool. So my parents love them to death, and it's just been, they're proud of me. Let's just say that. Sometimes they're overly proud of me, and I'm like, I don't need to be, they told me I was coming down to KSL, and my dad's like, oh, it's good. And I'm like, oh, just stop, just stop. I don't, but yeah, and just being involved in recovery, and I started the Recovery Strong thing when I was 9 months sober,
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What is Recovery Strong?
So Recovery Strong is a lifestyle brand. I started at 9 months sober, and,
it's another business you started.
Yeah, it's on the list.
No, and it was more of I wanted to be involved in recovery, and Ian's Fit to Recover. I used to watch him grow that when I was sitting in my bed, trying to get pills, and I watched him grow this little thing down in Salt Lake, and I was like, I want to do something. I want to do something in recovery, and so. Finally, when I got sober, I ride a lot of bikes. I used to be a cyclist. I don't ride my bikes as much anymore. I run more. But we were in treatment, and my counselor asked, "What do you guys going to do to change the face of recovery or the stigma of addiction?" And I thought, oh, Lance Armstrong's Live Strong Foundation, and I was like, Recovery Strong. And within 3 months, I owned the name. You know, we had a website. You know, and it was just kind of a project for me when I first started. I wanted to open a gym up north, and then we talked about I don't want to own a gym anymore. I just want to be involved. So it's kind of it changed to a lifestyle brand, and a lot of people out of the state. It's connected me to a lot of cool people, and we do our free workouts at Recover. You know, at my sister's
every
gym
Tuesday
night, 6:30. We've been doing that for almost 5 or 6 years now, except during COVID we had to shut it down. But like this last Tuesday, we had about 20-25 people, and that's just my way of giving back. You know, we work out for 20 minutes, circle up, check in, and you know, I shared that story, a little bit more tears, and it was a mess. It was a blubbery mess that night, but yeah, it's just something that I hope one day can be my full-time job, that I can just, and the Recovery Strong to me is just the way we live. You know, what you guys are talking about, there's sobriety and then there's recovery. Sobriety to me doesn't sound fun. Yes, some people need sobriety, but I like recovery. I love recovery. Like there's a blog on my website that I finally did my first blog like 2 months ago. We went down and rode motorcycles down in Tokerville. It's called the Tokerville Twister, and I was scared to do this ride. I was, you know, it's considered a real hard ride. We went and did it, and best feeling of my life, the highs I had from that thing. So I wrote about it. If you want to go to recoverystrong.com and read it, you know, it's the first real blog I've ever posted, but it just talks about fear, and it's called Fear is a Liar. And but just the feeling I had, if you don't, and like coming onto this podcast, this is scary stuff. Like this isn't what I do every day. I'm nervous, but I say yes to a lot of things that make me nervous, and so because I become better because of it. So,
I mean, we grow out of adversity.
Yeah.
I mean that's
do hard things.
You know, and that's one thing that I think an addict knows better than anybody else is that we can do hard things.
Yes.
If you've got sober, you know you can do hard things because it's one of the toughest things in the world to overcome. It really is. Another one is asking people for help, admitting your shortcomings, being honest with yourself. That's a tough one. You know what I mean? Is being honest with yourself. I mean, you were talking about, you know, you were happy when your friend got to go to rehab and you wanted help. And you're like, but I wasn't sure I was an alcoholic. I didn't know if I was an addict or what. You know what I mean? Because chances are you knew, but you didn't want to have that conversation with yourself and admit that, hey, I'm an addict. And now I'll tell anybody and everybody who asks, I don't care. You know what I mean? And if it bothers you, that sucks.
Yeah.
I mean, it does.
Yeah.
But that, like we had this girl, Tony, on the show. And I remember her telling her, she tells all her friends. And I go, why do you do that? She goes, because if they're really going to be my friends, they really got to know me.
Yeah. Oh,
and
for
this
sure.
is a real part of my story.
Yeah.
And so if I'm not being honest with you and that you know that, you know, this is where I was and this is who I was, then you don't know me. And if you want to be my friend, you need to know me.
It's, you know, I feel bad for people that, you know, you don't have to profess it either. To, you know, to each his own. But I feel bad that people don't want to. There's so much freedom in just being who you are. Exactly. Owning it and helping, you know, and using that to help other people, because that's all I say in Recovery Strong is if I can help one person, I've done my job, you know, and I hope I have. And I've gotten letters from people from out of state, you know, and obviously I want to change the world. I want Recovery Strong to be bigger than Live Strong. That's my goal. And I've got to get these again. I got all these wristbands that I had made because of that Live Strong Foundation, and I just donate them. I give them to people. You know, if anybody wants one, email me. I'll send you one, because I've had stories of people on a mountain ready to kill themselves, and they had one of my wristbands and they decided not to that day.
Wow.
You know, and I don't ever want that message to be about me. I want it to be about the name Recovery Strong, you know. So that's what I just wish I could be out of it and let people just have it be its own thing. You know, because I'm fallible, you know. I think the brand or the name is huge, and I have a lot of high hopes for it, and we got a lot of cool things coming up with it.
Well, if somebody's gonna grow it, I think it's gonna be you, Jerry.
I hope so. I hope so.
Well, I appreciate you stopping by and sharing your story. And at the end of the podcast, we always kind of talk about a takeaway, and I think my takeaway is recovery is possible, and you're living proof of that. And if it doesn't work the first time, it might work the second. And if it doesn't work the second, it might work the third. You have to keep
call
going.
that spiraling up.
Yeah.
Right?
I didn't know that was a thing, but yeah.
You spiral up. You can spiral down or you can spiral up. And if you look at going into rehab several times and learning each time and getting stronger each time, you're spiraling up. And I think that's a good message.
And recovery is possible. And I love what you're doing with it. And I love that you're sharing the message. And I'm just grateful for you stopping by and sharing your story. I'm grateful for your family. I'm going to let you in on a little story. So my daughter goes to his sister's dance gym.
Yep.
And when I was right out of rehab and I didn't have a job, and I had little money, my daughter loves to dance, and she still loves to dance. And I called them and I said, hey, I know I'm behind in payments. What can we do to keep my daughter in dance? And they told me about Jared, and they told me about what I was doing, and they really liked it. And they said, make payments. We will keep Frankie in here. We will keep Presley in here, and we will keep them dancing.
Wow.
You keep doing what you're doing, and you make payments. And what a relief that was. So once again, my addiction didn't take away something from my kids.
That's special. When somebody makes a real human connection to help somebody else out. I love that.
It meant the world to me. And it meant that I didn't have to sit down and tell my kids, unfortunately, you can't go to dance because I messed it up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's impressive.
So I love your family, and I will do anything for you guys, and I'm so glad you came by and shared your story. Dr. Matt, I love the spiraling up. I love the mental health check-in, and I love the fact that we get to do this every week.
Me too. It's a highlight of my week every week.
It's an amazing part. People all the time, they go, that's so good that you do this. And I go, you have no idea what it's doing for me.
You and I walk out of here just like
Cloud 9.
Yeah.
And we just met our new best friend.
Yeah.
I love it.
Absolutely.
So thank you for listening to Project Recovery. In case you forgot, Project Recovery is what?
It's a KSL podcast, baby.
Recovery Strong.